Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. The town I grew up in is considered to be a fairly small town overall. It's basically made up of continuations of previous generations. And while they have recently gotten a Sonic's Drive-In and a Dollar General, it is still and forever will be a super small town in north-central Colorado. Most people think of Denver whenever you mention the area, but we're actually a solid hour and a half away. I spent most of my life in the arms of what was basically the middle of nowhere. But unlike the rest of my graduating class of like 30, I ended up moving out further west when I hit 20. So I know both sides of life, this tiny town that no one's heard of, and the big city out on the coast. What's weird, life in the small town is actually more terrifying in my opinion. Sure, living in Cali, you may get robbed or accosted by someone in some sort of substance, but at least you can expect it. For some reason, learning about the horrors of your hometown tends to blindside you, or at least it did me. I don't know. Maybe not all small towns have secrets that they hold on to like-minded, or maybe they do. My hometown actually had a few things that everyone knew about, but no one spoke about. Some of them happened in my grandparents' time, some in my parents', but they were some of the best kept secrets around, honestly. The main thing I learned was that I apparently had an aunt at one time. Back when I was about 15, my grandma accidentally slipped up and called me Nance. My name is certainly not Nance, Nancy, or any variation of it. I asked her who Nance was, and I remember that when I asked her, she looked like she was about to seriously burst into tears. She said that she couldn't tell me, but that I should ask my father about it. And I honestly had no idea who they were, nor did I expect what my dad told me. Apparently, Nancy, lovingly referred to as Nance by my grandma, was my aunt, my father's older sister. This took me by surprise, as I never knew that I had a paternal aunt. I thought my father was an only child, mostly because I had never seen a photo of this woman, never heard her name mentioned, and I had never spoken to her. Obviously, I was curious about who she was, where she was, and why she hadn't been around. And I wish that I had quelled that curiosity, because it was pretty horrible. I was informed that back when my father was 12 and my Aunt Nancy was 14, she had apparently gone missing. There was one night back then that she went out with her friends, and she just never came home. At first, my grandma thought it wasn't a big deal. She was just out there and being stupid. But then, by morning, it was apparent to her that something had gone wrong. He told me that my aunt was a straight A student and would have likely graduated valedictorian. But that night she seemingly vanished. This was obviously creepy to me. I had never expected to have an aunt that was a missing person. Then he told me that she wasn't a missing person. She was murdered. He went on to tell me that when she went missing, the whole town went into what was essentially a small town lockdown. They put a curfew into effect, and every adult was on the lookout for Nancy. They seriously combed every inch of the city and spoke to everyone they could to see if anyone had known of her whereabouts. They had spoken to the friends that my aunt had gone out with, and they all told the same story. They were out basically loitering wherever, and a police officer pulled up with his lights on. They said that the officer rolled down the window and then called out to Nancy, and she ran over to speak to the officer. Apparently, she then turned around, yelled that she needed to go, then got in the car, and that was it. The biggest issue with this is that not a single one of our friends had seen this face. None of them could describe him at all, and there was no details on the car that made it stand out, and none of them had gotten the plate. A year after she had disappeared, everyone had pretty much given up on ever finding her alive. And someone actually ended up finding what looked like a shallow grave in a creek bed that had preceded. The police came out and dug it up, and as you can probably guess, they found the body of my aunt. Based on how she was buried, they assumed that she was sexually assaulted and the cause of her death was strangulation. At this point, the only thing anyone knew was that the last person to see her alive was a police officer, but there was literally no information on who it was. Then he explained that not long after they found her body, 2 police officers resigned from the force. One of them had a daughter of his own and was married, and the other was just the opposite, single and had no kids. The one with the family left town, no one has any idea where he went, and the other officer actually became the physical education teacher at a high school that I graduated from, and was also the football coach. I saw this man almost every day for 4 years, and every single day after this, I had to think that he may have seriously assaulted and murdered my aunt. The worst part, there's no way that we will ever know what actually happened to her, mostly because of how much damage had been done to her body over the year. There was no physical evidence, no DNA that they could find, no prints or anything like that. Just a dead girl and silent suspicions. Apparently, the entire town, for lack of a better word, knew that these 2 were involved. The timing was too suspicious, and it was apparently believed that their higher-ups may have been aware of the situation. But like I said, nothing ever happened to them. One is gone, and the other still teaches high school gym class. Honestly, it was just one more reason to get the hell out of there when I got the chance to do so. I grew up in a small local town. It's one of those that you just pass through on your way to your destination. Hell, most people probably wouldn't even stop there nowadays. If it's not for the lack of Wi-Fi, well, my parents still live there and they use some crappy local service that gets like 5 megabytes max. Or the one hotel located there. It's nothing fancy too, and usually just the home of meth users and runaways. Then, it has to be the homely look of the rusty metal sidings and abandoned-looking farmhouses with a creepy child swing in the front yard that really drives people away. I was born and raised here in the 90s, and I was a kid, so I was really naive and didn't realize till I was older how some things were actually weird and creepy about our town. Growing up seemed normal. Both of my parents raised me in the home given to them by my paternal grandfather. I went to the public school there, and I made friends with the people in my class, as well as some older and younger ones, as I was an only child. Nothing was ever too weird at that time. My friends and I would ride our bikes to the fire station on occasion to get sodas from the machine there. But I do remember my parents always tell me to take a specific route to avoid that neighborhood. I always thought that the people were just mean or didn't like kids. I learned as I got older though, that block was just a bunch of run-down and condemned houses that meth users and squatters took over. There was always something illegal and dangerous going on, so they of course didn't want to take any chances. Fair enough reason for me. So, as if I was an autopilot, that road didn't exist and I always avoided it. Even now and then, I go to visit my parents. I don't dare to walk or drive that way. Now, some may call this good or bad, but because of how small our town was, everyone knew everyone and everyone knew your business. That included this older lady that was called the neighborhood grandma. I called her Grandma Carol. She was always such a sweet and forgiving soul. She would make so many sweets during the holiday and bring them to church, and she'd pass them out to us kids on our way to the bus stop or at home. I remember her even bringing me a handmade scarf one year for Christmas and then having dinner with us. She didn't have any kids, and she was never married. She said that she could never find a man that could keep up with her, but she did have a dog. I believe it was a Boston Terrier, the small dog that always looked old and has a long mustache. His name was Prince, and she spoiled the hell out of him. He always had a different sweater in the winter that she made. I was so impressed by this that I actually went to her house once so she could teach me how to crochet. I still have the doll dresses she helped me make. Carol was also very giving to our town. She was a lunch lady for a while, but she ended up retiring. She was also very active in the tiny church there, as mentioned, by making sweets and other food items for parties and ceremonies. She also made what she called care packages, which included long-life food items like canned goods, boxed meals, juices, and etc., as well as small necessities like small travel bottles of soap and also Band-Aids. She always included a card with a different Bible passage on each one of them, and she would drive them over to the forbidden neighborhood and hand them out. I remember my dad saying that she was crazy for it because they could easily overpower her and kill her, but she didn't see it that way. She brought them food and water and treated them like everyone else, and they loved it. I remember one time, my mom actually went with her and was telling me a story that when they saw Carol, one guy put out his cigarette, dusted off his shirt and hands so he could hug her. He even helped pass out the gift baskets. My mom said she even got worried at one point because one of them said something inappropriate, and the guy helping had this raging look in his eyes, and he just smacked him on his head and told him to apologize to them. But Carol never had a concern being around them. She was always fine with them and even stayed and tried playing with the kids. Carol really made a difference to them, which made this whole situation even stranger. I was in middle school at this time. The school year was almost over, and next year, I would be going to high school. I was planning on going to Carol's when I got home because she agreed to help me make treats for our school graduation that was going to be that Friday. I got home, grabbed some of the ingredients that we had bought, so not to use up hers. I told my mom that I was going, and then I headed over to her place. When I got there, I noticed her gate was opened. She had a beautiful front yard, and she loved gnomes, and they were all over the place in different poses, different sizes, and she was proud of it. But I also know that she always kept the gate closed because she would let Prince run around while she was working on her yard. So I found that strange, but still a kid, so the thought didn't stay long. I got up to the door and knocked and waited. As I looked around, when she didn't come to the door, I rang the doorbell. Maybe I was impatient, but I remember it feeling like I waited forever. And after a while, I tried the door and it was locked, so I carefully walked to the back to make sure that I didn't step on any flowers, and I noticed that the door was cracked open. I knew it wasn't okay to go into someone's house without permission, so I yelled for her. I called for her a few times and even called for Prince because he always came running to the door. Now, even as a kid, this seemed very off, and I started getting scared. So I left all the supplies sitting on her porch and I ran home to tell my mom. She thought maybe she was just in the bathroom or fell asleep and forgot to shut her door, so she called her. When she didn't answer, my mom and I drove back over there. She told me to stay in the front porch and she went around back. After several minutes, she came back to me with my supplies and told me that we needed to go home. Once home, I wasn't really told much, but I do remember her telling me to go to the kitchen to make my treats, and that's about when the police showed up. My mom went outside to talk to them and then they left. I found out after a while that Carol was missing. My mom tried not to scare me but at least tell me what was going on. She said that when she went in there, neither Carol nor Prince were anywhere to be found, and she wanted to make sure she was okay, so she called the police. Not only our home, but the entire town was affected by this. It wasn't the same. There were many rumors, some hateful comments, and some flat-out crazy conspiracies. This was over 20 years ago, and Carol still has not been found. As I got older, my parents explained to me more as to what happened, and I would get little bits of information from people still living there. My mom explained that when she went in, her TV was on, and the kitchen table still had a bowl of oatmeal sitting on it. Her medication was also sitting next to her breakfast, but hadn't been taken for that day. It was one of those weekly pill boxes. I remind you, we noticed this after I got out of school, so around 3 or 4, way past the time that she would have taken her meds and eaten breakfast. She said Prince's food bowl was either empty or knocked over, which that bowl is never empty, and her purse was sitting open on her bed. My mom knew pretty quickly something was wrong because she didn't leave the home without her purse either, and when she was home, it was always sitting on her kitchen table. The fact that it was in her bedroom and open was not right. I heard from a lot of people that the police couldn't find any evidence, such as a break-in, no blood, nothing else seemed disturbed, but they definitely felt there was a foul play. A lot of people accused the addicts, including my father, which is possible. Maybe someone was high and thought they could get money out of her or something. But I didn't feel the same way. She was the only person that didn't see them as less of a person. She tried helping them, and they seemed like they had a lot of respect for her too. I get that some people are unstable and unpredictable, but I think they were just as shooken up. But that didn't stop them from being harassed and interrogated, I heard. The only thing that ever happened that gave us hope, but also tore us down more, was a few years after her disappearance. My mom told me when I came home from high school that there was a group of women that got together to play bunco at night, and as one of them was leaving, she heard barking. When she finally saw where it was coming from, she noticed it was a small gray dog that looked malnourished and in need of a bath. She had brought the dog back inside the home when she started realizing he looked just like Prince. Surprisingly, she confirmed it when she called by his name and he responded. "Here's Carol's dog, alive, covered in dirt, oil and starving, but definitely alive." It had given us hope for a while that Carol may have been close and even alive. But then people fear that if Prince was alone, then that would mean that something bad has happened, as she would never leave him. It's still a mystery to our little town, but I had to move out after graduating. Not only did I need to relocate in order to get any kind of career, but that was all anyone ever talked about. I miss her. She was like a grandmother to me, but hearing about it day in and day out takes a toll on you. I hope we get closure one day, but I also don't want to hear they found her in any condition other than happily making blankets and cookies in seclusion. This isn't as much a small-town horror story as it is a middle-of-nowhere horror story, or a horror story that took place just past a small town. but I think it still qualifies because it occurred on our way out of a small town. A few years ago, around the summer of 2018, my girlfriend and I came into a bit of money, and we decided that we wanted to take a cross-country road trip. Basically, we would drive from Pittsburgh all the way to Las Vegas, spend a few days in Vegas, and then drive back. The trip in both directions was going to take around 32 hours total if we went straight across on I-70, and we would be tasked with driving from Pennsylvania, then to Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Missouri, Kansas, Colorado, and Utah, before finally getting to Nevada, our final destination. We planned to do this over a few days, and we wanted to stop in a few states to get pictures and just kind of enjoy some of the Midwest. I know that a lot of people will say that the Midwest is boring, but if you think too hard on it, every state is boring. I think they all have their charm. So we plotted our whole route, decided on a few places to stop, and everything was going smoothly. And most of the trip was just straight driving, and we were making great time, and this event was really the only thing that stood out. There was one point where we had to stop to get gas, and my girlfriend said that she wanted to also stop and get something to eat. At this point, we were about 2/3 of the way through Kansas, and the next town was a small town called Ellis. Ellis is a bit to the west of Hayes, which is actually a decent-sized city for being in the literal middle of nowhere. But Ellis is pretty much the polar opposite small town vibe, with pretty much nothing to do or see. But it has its own rustic charm. We pulled into Ellis and got gas. When I saw a menu for a restaurant that I decided that we needed to try, it was a locally owned pizza and Mexican food combo, and I am a sucker for small town pizza. I grabbed the menu and got back out to where my girlfriend was finishing filling the tank, and I told her that we had to go. She agreed, and it sounded interesting if nothing else. So we left for the station, and we found the small building for this anomaly of a restaurant. Cutting the details about the food, it was seriously good. If you're ever in Ellis, check this place out. You'll find it. It's literally the only pizza and Mexican food place there. And the visit seemed to be fine for the most part. I was enjoying my lunch, and I thought that she was as well. Until I looked up and saw that she had a strange look on her face, kind of like she was a bit worried. I immediately asked her what was wrong, and she mentioned that there was a guy at a table at the other corner that was staring intently at us. At first, I didn't think much of it, but then I looked back and sure enough, he was staring. He didn't even make an attempt to look away when I checked. He nodded at me, basically confirming that he knew that I saw him. I quickly looked back to my girlfriend and tried to play it off. Maybe he knew we were tourists and he didn't like the idea of outsiders. Maybe he thought she was pretty. Maybe he was just a very angry man by nature. She didn't really buy it, but my attention got pulled away from the situation when the waitress came to the table asking how we were doing. I told her that we were doing well, and then I started to tell her that we were actually from out of town and traveling across the country. As I mentioned this, I tried to pull my girlfriend into the conversation in hopes to get her mind off of the creep in the corner. It sort of worked. Then the waitress seemed excited to talk to us about our trip. We explained that we were from Pennsylvania and that we wanted to drive all the way to Vegas so that we could see the parts of the country that we otherwise wouldn't have. The conversation between us was all great, and she mentioned one or two other places that we should check out. She started talking about the one time that she had gone to Vegas when she was younger. Really, it was just friendly small talk. When we finished talking and she walked away to go do what she had to do, my girlfriend looked back and told me that the guy was gone. Honestly, that was a relief. I was thinking that we could stop worrying about him and that she would calm down and finish her lunch. I really thought that was going to be the end of the situation, that we would leave, get back on the highway, and continue driving for a few more hours before we checked into a hotel somewhere. Unfortunately, as fate would have it, that's not how things went, at least not right away. After lunch, we got back in the car and we hopped back into I-70 and then started out of the town. It was less than a couple miles down the way when we spotted what looked like a minivan stopped in the middle of the road long ways. It looked like they were in the middle of a U-turn on the highway and just stopped, or maybe their car had died. Either way, I slowed down as I approached, and I stopped the car a bit of a distance from the actual van, a couple car lengths at most. After a few seconds of just sitting there, I noticed that there were two guys sitting in the van, one in the driver's seat and one in the passenger seat, and they looked like they were discussing something or arguing. It was really hard to tell. Then after a few more moments, they looked back at us and get out of the car. That's when my girlfriend said, "That guy that just got out of the passenger side, that's the guy from the pizza place that kept staring at me." I thought maybe she was mistaken and maybe she was just being a bit paranoid because she was freaked out by the whole thing. But then the guy walked around the van, same flannel shirt, same blue baseball cap, same torn jeans as the weirdo from before. It was at that moment that it clicked what this was, or more so what it likely was. These guys were looking to do something aggressive towards us. Obviously, I didn't know the specifics, if they were going to rob us, steal our car, kidnap us, and etc. But it wasn't going to be good. Everything seemed to be incredibly still and silent for a few seconds, until I saw the pizza creep start to reach out for something. I have no idea what it was, but as soon as I saw him reach, I told her to get down and I floored it. I pushed the pedal as hard as I could, and while I may have been driving an early 2000s Honda, that thing jumped in speed quickly. I aimed the car straight for him and tore the shoulder, basically playing chicken with this guy. He was either to get out of the way and let us pass, or embarrassingly run over my tiny ass sedan. Thankfully for his sake, he jumped out of the way and I got past him on the shoulder. We kept going at max speed until I thought it was safe to slow down. Honestly, it was really weird, and I realize now how dumb it was to do what I did. If he had a gun, he would have shot me and killed me while I was driving toward him. If he hadn't moved, I would have murdered him with my car, and that would have been a whole other situation. Alternatively, they could have chased us, and let me tell you that Ellis is one of the last small towns that have an actual presence through Colorado. It was a solid 4 hours to Denver, which was the next metropolitan, and I'm assuming that these guys wouldn't have been keen on us letting us lead them on for 4 hours without grabbing us off the road. As lovely of a city as Ellis was, and as good as the pizza was, I don't think we'll ever go back. On the way home, we actually took a different highway just to avoid that part of Kansas altogether. And here are the top comments for my last video. And here's the riddle for this video. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate each and every one of you. But I would also like to thank my amazing patrons, my top tippers, and my dearest channel members. Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it with all of my heart. If you want to support the channel further, you could also choose to become a patron, a tipper, or a channel member. But remember, it's appreciated, but never a requirement. I would also like to announce that we have merch now. The link is in the description of the video, along with all my other social media links, like my Discord server, Twitter, Instagram, and others. You can connect with me and send your stories there. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't yet, and comments are highly appreciated. And remember, your fear feeds me.